Good morning, everyone. We've got a great turnout today. This is Brad Palmer from Jostle Corporation, and I'm joined this morning by Karen Martin. And we've got a Halloween treat for you, the trick to employee engagement. It's not what you think. For those of you on Twitter, Karen, can you show us the next slide?
Sure. Here we go.
There are our Twitter handles, and if people want to participate along there, that would be great too. Our format for today is Karen's going to kick things off. I'll then pick up with some examples from some real-world companies, and we'll wrap up with some Q&A and finish up in the hour. So over to you, Karen. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Brad, and welcome everyone. One more thing, there is a link on the bottom of that slide with the Twitter handles for materials if you happen to want to download materials right now, or you can do that after the webinar. So just a bit of background about me and what my perspective is that I've been working for over 25 years managing, building, and improving operations, and I've had my consulting practice for 20 years now, working with companies of all sizes and all types in all over the world. And what I find is there are these common problems, let's say, around employee engagement that drove me to write a book called The Outstanding Organization. It was published late last year. And in addition to working with organizations, and a large part of that is people development, I also teach at the University of California, San Diego, and I do a fair amount of speaking and, as you can see on the slide, a fair amount of writing as well, with a new book coming out in December on value stream mapping. So one of the things I thought we would do today is to learn a little bit about what my experience has shown are the 3 essential conditions for realizing employee engagement. So I think that sometimes when I talk with clients, they seem to be hard-pressed to understand what the conditions are that you have to set for engagement. And I'm a big believer in setting a foundation and getting a very solid foundation so that you can accelerate improvement. And then why I feel that employee selection and onboarding is the single most important process for any organization to nail. And then how to use continuous improvement, critical thinking, and problem solving as your central means to engage employees. So a lot of the work I do is operational excellence and lean transformation, and a big part of that is getting everyone in the organization very deeply developed in terms of continuous improvement, critical thinking, and problem solving, and building that capability across the whole organization. And then finally, how do you prepare your leaders for this new way of operating, which is so highly successful? So the book, The Outstanding Organization, came from years and years of working with companies and finding that despite their best attempts to make good improvement and to engage employees and get a much more deeply fulfilling workplace in place, they were unable to, and my exploration on why that is. And so one of the things I discovered in looking at high performance in any walk of life, not just business, is that there were these 4 mindsets and behaviors that were present 100% of the time in top performing companies, individuals, whether it be sports, music, the arts, whatever. And so those are clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement. And engagement is a bit of a follow-on for the other 3. If you get great clarity, focus, and discipline in an organization, you are very likely going to have high levels of engagement. But it is a bit of a standalone topic as well, which is the subject of today's webinar. So the problem is if an organization doesn't have high degrees of clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement, they get a bit of a cracked foundation. And then anything they try to do, whether it's making improvement or just achieving business results, is likely going to have they're going to have a tougher time of it, and the employees are going to suffer as a result of it. And so my emphasis is very much on the engagement side of things, so that we can get high-performing workplaces where people are charged up at the end of the day and not drained at the end of the day. And lean comes from the Toyota business practices, and what lean tells us is that people need to have a very high degree of engagement as it relates to being respected. So respect for humanity and respect for people is a big part of the lean philosophy, and achieving engagement is very much linked to having that high degree of respect, and I'll share a little bit more as we go through the webinar. So in my view, we've got three big problems when it comes to employee engagement. The first one is that when I go into organizations, I get an immediate vibe. I can feel energetically what's going on in the organization. And again, no matter what size they are, no matter what type of industry it is, very often when I walk in, I can just feel that employees are not thrilled to be there, or a large segment of employees are not thrilled to be there. And so what I like to think about is, geez, what is it that could take an employee who gets up in the morning and has, let's just say that they're well rested, they go into work with a fairly high degree of energy, and then throughout the day, little by little by little, processes and systems erode that energy and start draining on someone, so that at the end of the day, when they leave the office, they're often, have very low energy. Wouldn't it be great if we could get workplaces designed, and it is very possible, so that when people leave at the end of the day, they're actually as high of energy as they walked in with, or possibly even higher levels of energy because of what they've experienced during the workday. So the experiences that we have are what engage or disengage. It's not the individual who's engaging or disengaging. It's the systems and the environment. So when you look at the statistics, Gallup does, a survey every single year on disengagement and engagement, and consistently we find that 7 out of 10 American workers are not engaged or actively disengaged in their work. And I didn't check before this webinar to find out how many of their numbers are Canadian-based, but I know some of them are. I don't know what percentage of them are. I think the majority of their data is actually from the U.S., but I would imagine that there's a fairly good parallel in Canada if, in fact, that's a small percentage of the Canadian workforce, is a small percentage of who they've interviewed. And the thing that's scary about this 7 and 10, or very disturbing about it, is that that equates to 450 to 550 billion with a B dollars a year in lost productivity. So this isn't just about making a feel-good environment that employees can, come in and skip into work and skip out of work. It's about helping organizations be successful, but doing it in a way where we're not destroying the human spirit and having people have a poor quality of life as a result of their work. So when you look at the Gallup definitions of engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged, the actively disengaged category is the most problematic because they're the ones that aren't just quietly unhappy, they're actually acting out their unhappiness. And so what I find when I work with organizations and we put together cross-functional teams to make improvement, very often there'll be someone on the team that is, wildly unhappy. And what happens is that creates a lot of interpersonal and interdepartmental tension, which once you get that person back re-engaged into the process, which I'll explain in a minute how you do that, that level of unhappiness melts away, relationships get healed, and departments are able to work far more effectively together. So this engagement thing is a pretty deep-seated problem that has to be tackled in order for an organization to be successful. I see there's a question that someone asked a link to the handouts. It's on my SlideShare site, so slideshare.net is the URL for it, and then it's Karen Martin Group is my handle on SlideShare, and it's the most recent slide presentation I just uploaded. So the three types of employees, the engaged ones are the ones that have a profound connection to their company, and they're deeply they have high levels of energy and they're deeply moving that organization forward. So it becomes a symbiotic relationship between the employee giving to the organization and the organization giving back to the employee. All too often we talk about the organization giving back but don't really deliver, or in the worst cases don't even think that the organization should be giving back to the employee. And I've met a fair number of leaders in my life that feel that way, and that's just wrong. So when you look at Gallup over the years, this is another thing that's quite concerning. They started doing their surveys in 2000, or at least as far as this way of reporting, and the most recent one was in 2012. And if you look at the red bars, which are the actively disengaged bars over the year, compared to the yellow where they're not engaged, and then the green where they're engaged, there's not a fundamental difference in well over a decade now. So what are we doing wrong? And that's what one of the big drivers in me writing The Outstanding Organization was, what are we doing wrong? There's got to be something, because I think that we really want employees to be engaged, but there's something happening at a fundamental level that's causing employees to not engage for a variety of reasons. So that brings me to the second problem, and that is that the average company is operating at a fraction, level-wise, performance-wise, a fraction of what they're capable of. And I know that because I work with companies in some cases for a long-term period of time, just boost their performance in certain areas, sometimes 60, 70, 80%, sometimes doubling what they're capable of doing without adding any additional cost to the operation. In fact, with reducing expense. And I don't mean employees. This is not at all an exercise in layoffs and reductions in force. This is a matter of helping employees do work in a way that lets them be highly, highly successful. So we've got, on the one hand, problem one, the employees are not engaged. Problem two, companies aren't operating at the levels they need to and want to and need to in a competitive world. So what are we going to do about this? Well, when you look at world-class operations performance-wise, and we're talking financial performance here, there are many measurements to determine whether you have high performance or not, but financial is one that the for-profit sector tends to look at the most. What you find is in world-class operations, there's almost a 10-to-1 ratio of engaged employees to those actively disengaged employees. And typically those actively disengaged employees are poor hire choices. So they, it's not a case typically where you get a great hire that then comes into an organization and becomes actively disengaged because of the system that they're operating in, which is very common. That's not what we're talking about here. In this case, these small numbers of employees are very likely just poor choices for the organization. But then when you move over to the average organization, you find that only 33% of their employees are engaged, and you've got a whopping, almost 20% of the employees actively disengaged. And remember, active disengagement means that they are acting out. They are acting behaviorally their levels of disengagement. So it's not like they're just becoming null, like an EKG line that goes flat. That's not what's going on with active disengagement. They're actually acting out. So I would encourage all of you to just sit and think for 1 minute about the people you work with, and think about some of the people that are a little more difficult to work with than others. Now, when you think about what is causing the problem, you will find that in most cases, it's not that person and their personality. I know it seems like it is, but it's not. It's typically the systems, the processes that they're being asked to perform within that cause high levels of frustration and then acting out and disengagement. So it's not the people. I'm going to repeat this several times. It's not the people. It's the systems and processes within which they operate or are being expected to operate and being expected to perform at high levels. So when I work with leadership teams and they're complaining about productivity in the workforce, I will often say, we've met the enemy and it is us. It's people that are managing and leading in organizations that cause the conditions that cause disengagement. So that's a very important fact and a reality to confront. Now, what do we do about it? Well, what I discovered is that there were what I call the 3 C's of employee engagement and getting high levels of employee engagement. And the first one is connection. And all of these C's are Psych 101. This is basic human nature, and I'm all about going with human nature and not fighting human nature. So let's go with it and figure out how can we better help employees to connect within the organization, and what levels of connection do they need? Well, they need to have connection to the organization's purpose or vision, to what the annual goals are so that they understand how to prioritize what they're working on. They definitely need to be connected to their immediate supervisor, assuming a hierarchical organization, to their peers, and to their customers. And so the customer piece of this is something I work with organizations a lot, that employees very often in certain parts of a company have absolutely no connection to the customer and don't even think about the external customers of the organization. And it's very difficult for them to feel a sense of purpose and worth and like they're really serving and contributing if they don't have that connection with the external customer. So it's a lot of the work that we do in the beginning stages is making that connection. The other thing to realize is that the best time to grab someone and keep them at high levels of engagement is on their first day of work, or even better, the first interview they have. They are at their best. They are at the highest level of energy they will ever have. And when you think about your last job, how did you feel going in on the first day? Hopeful. Hopeful. No matter where people come from, whether they've been fired, they get a new job, they're hopeful. They had a job that they didn't feel respected and didn't feel that they could contribute, they come to a new job, they're hopeful. They were in a job where they had an awful boss, they're coming to a new job, they're hopeful that they're not going to experience that again. They're incredibly hopeful, and so you have them at you're hired. So let's take that you're hired and leverage that fully so that we can get high levels of engagement that sustain throughout the life of a person at that organization. So take a look at this. This is a client I worked with where we did an employee survey and we did a manager survey. We did two different surveys and basically found that when you blended the two numbers, before any improvement, 44% of the people said that they always or sometimes had everything they needed to operate effectively on the very first day of work. So when someone walks in a door, you would think that they would have everything they need to be successful on day one. And that might be an office, a computer, business cards, supplies, security badges, access to IT, all the things that I find are often happening day 2, 3, 4, week 2, week 3, week 4. It takes forever to get someone fully functional, and that is, in the Toyota world and in my world, a fundamental act of disrespect. Now, 23% of those managers and employees said that rarely or never did new hires have everything they need to function effectively on day one. After a round of improvement and looking at what needed to happen on day one, they were able to get the always and sometimes category up to 63% within a matter of 2 months, and the rarely and never category dropped down to 14%. So good improvement was made in a matter of a couple of months, and they continued to move the needle after I moved on to another part of the organization. This is an important point. Employees have to be given everything. And I hear sometimes, well, we're not going to give them business cards until they come in because we want to make sure they actually show up and they're expensive. You know what? You can print business cards on a printer and give someone a stack of 10 to 20 business cards on day one so that they feel like they're part of the family, and if they have any customer engagement and if they're meeting with people where they need an email address and all those things, they have something to give people on day one. I have a zero tolerance for this. We don't want to do it until they're here because we're not sure they're going to show up. How many people don't show up on day one? Really? Not many. It's a silly policy that makes no sense, and it disengages right away. Now, on onboarding, there are 3 categories of information and materials that I encourage you to think about as you're looking at your onboarding processes. And Brad's going to speak to onboarding a bit in his part as well. This is critical that people have all the tools they need, all the information they need, and any job-specific orientation they need as quickly as possible. I've had companies, where I'm working with them, and I find out that new hires didn't even have a physical place to sit on day one. And sometimes it took a week and a half for them to get an office. That's inexcusable, and it's a fundamental act of disrespect. Here's another thing that I highly recommend you do, is that there's a type of mapping many of you may not be familiar with, but this is the subject of my new book coming out in December. It's called value stream mapping. So it looks very complex. Don't get overwhelmed by this. Just hang with me as I explain what this is. This is a very, very high level of how work flows through an entire organization. Very complex processes, very complex customer base. The rectangles up at the top here are different applications and IT systems. These blocks in the middle here are the actual work flow as work is being handed off from function to function or department to department. Customers up here in the center. This is an analytical tool that leaders use to set improvement strategy, but it's also a phenomenal tool to help new hires know where they sit in the organization and how they fit in and relate to a customer. So similar to the maps that you see in malls or in airports that say, you are here. This can be something that, for example, an EDI specialist on day one could understand how he or she fits in with the greater picture immediately. Clear, concise, easy to understand. They understand exactly where they fit, and you immediately start that connection on day one. The other thing is that a lot of organizations hire me to spend a lot of time on customer-facing improvement. So it's improving processes that are going to either generate more revenue or keep customers from leaving or deliver more quickly to customers to improve loyalty, and that's all well and good. But I have a provocative stance on that if a company said, okay, we're only going to work on one process this year, which would be kind of silly to only do one, but let's just say that they say we're only going to do one process, I would vote for new hire onboarding. And most people in the operations area, which is my roots are operations, would say that's ridiculous. We need to deliver better to customers. I say, that is not the most important thing. The most important thing is getting those new hires on board, fully functional, totally engaged, connected as quickly as possible so that you can perform to high levels as an organization. Without that fundamental in place, you got nothing. So I highly recommend that you all take a very close look at your onboarding processes and shore them up. The second C is control. Control sometimes sounds a little scary to people because they fear anarchy. Leaders especially think, oh no, if we give people control, it's just going to be chaos and nuts. Well, actually, it's not. Control is another human condition. It's an absolutely requirement for people to feel safe and secure. If you look at any of the global strife in the world that's related to political or religion or economic kinds of tension, it's almost always fundamentally about people feeling out of control. And so this is, Psych 101 again, that people need to have some level of control. So what kind of control do we give them? Well, they need to have extremely heavy involvement in the decisions that influence how they do their work. Now, this isn't about controlling how much money they make or what their benefit plans look like. In fact, all of the surveys that I've seen show that benefits and money and all those things really don't influence engagement much at all. You have to have at least a baseline, a minimum amount, but adding to that doesn't increase engagement. What control is asking us to do is to set very clear boundaries from a strategic leadership position and then let people design within those controls and those boundaries how they best do their work. Now, this doesn't mean, for example, that all of a sudden people can blast music and those kinds of environmental things, but it does mean that if they're responsible for, say, data entry, that they have some ability to control and design the best way for them to be highly successful doing that task. So this is about them being able to be highly successful, and the person who knows best how to do that is the person doing the work. So this is starting to kind of lead into my talking about leaders' role versus the frontline role. Leaders need to set strategy and spend lots of time in that visioning, strategic, looking ahead world, and then pass the baton to the front lines who can determine how best they could be successful once that strategy is set. So there's a clear line in the sand between strategy and tactics in this model. And here is that line. What you'll see is that there are some tools that Lean brings to the table, value stream mapping and Kaizen events being two of them, that help kind of establish the strategy versus tactics. And the accountability shifts from the leaders doing both what has to happen and then telling people how to do it to moving that how to the workforce so that they can have higher degrees of control. And by the way, they're far more connected with their work when they've had a very strong hand in designing how work should be done. So middle management is a little bit on the fence on this one. They need to be somewhat engaged with strategic decisions, but they also are closer to the work, so they're far more able to play a role in tactical decision making as well. But senior leaders definitely need to stay out of tactics, and the workforce isn't really authorized to get into high-level strategy. So two very clear roles. So the baton passing is one that we facilitate when we go into an organization by having activities that have much more clear roles and responsibilities around them, so that the leaders start feeling more and more comfortable passing that baton to the workers, and the employees are learning more and more how to actually operate with this new sense of freedom. And in a little bit more of a democracy kind of environment, they have to learn some new behaviors as well to function in that. And it doesn't happen quickly, by the way, especially if you've had a very command and control kind of environment. Moving away from that takes years to get it really firmly in place, and the proof is always in the pudding. You can say that you're going to do something, but it's the doing that really matters, and that's what people look at. The third C is creativity. So this is, again, another human nature element. We all have a high need to be creative, and if you look around, there's rarely a person that doesn't have some sort of hobby or some creative outlet, whether it's art, music, hiking, some ability to be creative. And our creativity is often shut off the minute we walk in a door in an organization. And that's, again, kind of going against human nature instead of working with human nature to achieve higher levels of performance, dare I say outstanding performance. So this is taking every single person, no matter where they sit in the organization, and creating systems and processes that enable them to have full use on their talents, their capacities, their potentiality, their aptitude, their abilities, and the skills that they come in with. So this isn't just what you come in with, it's what you're capable of doing. And it's the people that aren't ever pushed to that next level, because challenging is absolutely respectful if done respectfully, but it's also not, if you don't draw on what the person's capable of doing, they'll just shut down and become disengaged very, very quickly. So one of the ways to do that is to get the employees, every employee at every level, from bottom to top, top to bottom, across the organization, everywhere, highly proficient in problem solving and making improvement. So problem solving is not done well in most organizations. And you would think that we come out of the womb as these proficient problem solvers, but we don't. Most people don't have an innate aptitude to be a masterful problem solver, but it can be taught. And it can be taught pretty easily. So we have to get everyone in the organization able to solve problems, so they need the authority to solve problems. They need the skills to solve problems. And then when they are able to do that, problem solving is a high. Being able to go, yes, check, got that done, is a high. Living with problems day in and day out that never seem to go away is the quickest way to disengage a workforce. So Kaizen events are a form of rapid improvement event that is one way that you can start getting some of these, just kind of playing around and experimenting with some of these ways to engage workers. I would highly recommend you don't just do Kaizen events. It's just one means, and it shouldn't be overdone like anything in life. Too much in excess becomes a problem. So they're 2 to 5 day focused improvement activities where the workforce themselves design and implement improvements after leadership has set boundaries. So leaders don't have to feel like they're just giving away the store and letting people go crazy and run amok. There's a whole process to defining exactly what the workforce can do and what they can't do. But the benefit is you get this rapid results and learned behavior in these Kaizen events if they're done well. So what you do is you have these highly cross-functional teams with very clear objectives, and they're working very quickly to get the data they need. This is not analysis paralysis. This is just get the minimum amount of data they need in order to make great decisions, and then they design and they implement within the Kaizen event. So at the end of 5 days, for example, a new process has been created. And if you end up with these things, a lot of organizations are not doing Kaizen events very well because they end up with a plan It's not about a plan, it's about actually executing change during the Kaizen event. So this is an example of one of the people in one of the Kaizen teams I facilitated a couple years back that I'm still in very close contact with. He reports that Kaizen events literally changed his whole attitude about work and really ignited and unleashed something in him that he hadn't had unleashed before. And so, you know, when he goes home and tells his family it was one of the best working days he's ever had, this is a guy that was in his 40s at this time, it's about being able to use those full capabilities and then taking that into day-to-day work and allowing people then to keep going with that level of connection and creativity and control day-to-day. Another way, I'm just going to throw some things out for you to actually Google and do some exploration on after the webinar, but there's a really wonderful tool called A3 Management. It's a problem-solving approach. It comes from Toyota as well. A3 happens to refer to the size of paper that the report is typically written on, but it's not about the report. It's really about the process for generating the report. And the key in A3 management is having a coach or a mentor working directly with a problem owner or a problem team or an improvement team. So the coach and mentoring is what enables the person to develop the skill set they need to learn how to think more critically and deeply and to give them the authority to go ahead and make the kinds of improvements that they are capable of making and getting leadership, frankly, out of the way of making those kinds of improvements. Now, the last thing I'll mention is organizations tend, well, not the last thing, but almost the last thing, organizations tend to think that this can all happen far more quickly than it can. Learning takes time. Just think back to any of you who play an instrument, how long it took for you to be able to, do a scale without botching it. Those of you that play a sport, if you golf, or, it just takes a while to become really good at anything. In fact, research shows it takes about 10,000 hours, which is 10 years, to get all the way up into this master status. So you don't have to wait until you're a master to have all kinds of wonderful benefits for the organization and the individual, but it does require us to take a deeper look on what it takes to get employees engaged through the process of teaching them how to be better problem solvers. And I work with companies of all sizes, like I said. It is the thing that ignites people faster than anything I've ever experienced in all my 25 years of doing the work that I do. The third problem and the last problem is a big one, and I call it the blame game. So in my book, I make a very stern statement about this, is that I see organizations all the time and leaders all the time pointing fingers at people for problems and often firing people for problems. So Brad's going to talk about firing in a minute in a little slightly different perspective, where perhaps you have a wrong hire to begin with. But this kind of firing based on performance is just wrong. Systems and processes, remember, will either enable someone to be successful or not. You might have that rare sociopath come into your organization who just wants to mess everything up, but the average person and the majority of the people come into work every morning wanting to do well, wanting to serve, and we do everything in our power in many organizations to not let them do that. So this idea that performance is related to the employee is wrong and needs to change. People aren't the problem. It's the systems and the processes. And in the Toyota world, in the lean world, that is a fundamental act of disrespect. What we want is we want to have more Terrys in the world. We want to have more people saying things like this about wherever they work. I've become a better person, a better husband, a better friend from working at Gore. W.L. Gore Associates has a wonderful, he's an associate, they have a wonderful culture that they've worked very hard to build and maintain over many, many decades of being in business. This is the ideal. It can be done, and I encourage all of you to start today taking that first step toward creating a Gore-like experience at your organization. Remember, it's not about making employees engage. You have to set the conditions for them to engage, and then they will engage. People want to engage. It's just a matter of getting all the right foundations in place, and they will engage. Brad, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Karen. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Let me get my screen up here. So my own background, I'm Brad Palmer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Jostle. My own career has been one of building, leading, and transforming teams and helping them bring very innovative products to market in a pretty big variety of corporations. And Jostle came from that. Jostle is a software platform that helps organizations and helps leaders do the kind of things that Karen's been talking about. It provides that connection, that employee control, helps find that creativity and make sure all your skills are harnessed, and provides that clarity and focus that Karen talked about. I'm going to provide some very sort of pragmatic examples, some from my own experience and some from our Jostle customers. One of the great things about being the CEO of Jostle is that we have awesome customers that really lead the way in terms of engaging their people, so there's some great examples there. And then after that, we'll have some questions, and please go ahead and get your questions queued up through the on-screen control that you have. So I'm going to just pick out some nuggets here. The first one I want to talk about is building diverse teams. And I'm going to use an example, a real example actually, from my past. Early in my career, I spent a decade working in a very large research institute. It had about 2,000 employees. And I'm actually going to have a little bit of fun, and I'm going to use Jostle's People View to illustrate this. So that early on in its life, that institute created a new department. It was actually the chemical engineering department, and it hired a gentleman from England to get that department up and running. And he did that. He then hired a whole bunch of people, all PhDs from England, all clean-cut Caucasian males, all with glasses. And he had an entire department of people that all thought the same, all actually looked the same. That institute then didn't hire anybody for about 15 years, and that workforce grew older, and they finally got back into hiring mode, and they could no longer hire from Britain, so they moved to Queen's University and continued to hire people in the same mold, Caucasian, with glasses, clean-cut guys. And the department was just hilarious. They had 20 or 30 people that all looked the same. But then one year, a young lady completely blew all the males out of the water at Queen's University, and she was actually a local. So they really had no choice but to hire her. And for the first time ever, they broke out of their mold. That started to build some diversity into that team. She actually excelled and very quickly actually became the new head of that department. And soon after her, they actually hired their first non-Caucasian, who also was clean-cut and had glasses. So a bit of a fun story, but really the moral of this is build diversity into your teams. The second one Karen talked about, the importance of onboarding your culture and welcoming your employees into the experience of your company. Our customers actually do a great job of welcoming our platform into their companies. This is actually one of our customers launching the Jostle platform, and this is the kind of spirit that really brings customers alive. One of the things that happens in the Jostle platform is a news view that really captures the vibe of your organization and lets your culture and your values and your successes come to life. This is from a customer that's a large charity in Calgary, Alberta, and if you look at the news view here, you'll quickly get a sense of what their values are and what they care about and how they come together as a team. Karen also talked about the importance of onboarding people, and one of the best ways to do that is actually to provide some of that control Karen talked about and help people manage their own onboarding, get the processes and the materials and the way of doing that defined, and then make it available to that new person and let them drive it through the organization. It's a great way for them to explore your processes and meet your people. This is actually the library view in Jostle. It's a view that allows key content to sort of come to light and be easy to find. And it's from a customer called Plexus that is in the purchasing business. They purchase materials for a large group of hospitals. And they have a wonderful spirit and culture in their company, and part of that is driven by onboarding. As you can see in their library here, they've got the materials available to people that as they onboard them, they can quickly get to those materials, understand the process, and drive it themselves. The next little nugget is that team fit matters. And this time I'm going to just tell a story from my own past. In one of my stages of my career, I worked for a large company, and the HR team decided it was time to better define our job functions and rate them. So they hired a well-known consultant company who came in and started focus sessions with different teams of people to really understand the true nature of different jobs and where the values lied and what were the skills that were really required to make those jobs happen. And I was in a focus group, and we were talking about a particular job function. And I was, the facilitator was drawing out from me an example of someone who was not fitting the job well and really wasn't the right person, and trying to use that to better illuminate what the job was really about. And going back and forth with me was another person participating who was at the same time doing the opposite, providing an example of someone who really excelled at this particular job function. And as we spoke back and forth, it became clear to both of us that we were actually talking about the same person. There was actually a person that we shared. I had him half-time, the other guy had him half-time, and we both had him in the same role. On my team, and the way I looked at that role, he did not fit at all. He was a very poor performer. But same job, same company, other person, he fit extremely well and excelled. So by the end of that session, we decided he probably should work full-time for the other guy, and he went on to really excel. So that whole concept of not just the fit to your culture, but the fit to the team, it really does matter. Next point, next nugget is fire fast. And as Karen mentioned, I'm talking about when you first hire people. Hiring process isn't perfect. You really want to make sure you've got a probation period and make your decisions there quickly. If you do that in a respectful and honest way and provide some clarity and feedback to the person that's captured in this, almost every time they will learn something about it, and they'll go find that job that really is the right career fit for them and be way more successful than they will be on your team. A trap I see people get into very often here is they feel very guilty about letting that person go, and they fall into the trap of trying to justify why it is they sense that they don't fit and aren't the right person for the role. If your instincts tell you that it's not the right person, trust your instincts and help that person move on to their next role and find the right person for your team. Next nugget is avoid grand plans. You can waste a lot of time trying to plan out the future from now to infinity, but it'll never play out the way you plan. I have a very strong belief that you need super clarity on where you want to get to, but focus on the immediate tasks and pare them down so you can accomplish them very quickly. We do that at Jostle using a Kanban system. This is actually a photograph from the Jostleplex. And on the board there, you can see our coding development. Each card represents a task, or a sprint as we'd call it, which is basically one person, usually a week or 2 weeks of his effort, to deliver the next little nugget of functionality into our product. So we have great clarity as to exactly what's coming next and who's working on it, and the development sequence that goes through as it moves from design through design review into actual coding and then quality control. And we have great clarity on how our platform builds out and how all the moving pieces come together. But in between the now and the sort of infinity, where we want to get to, we don't plan at all. We don't worry about that. We just focus on what we're working on, have a good idea what's next, and a very clear idea where we're heading. Helps us be very productive and very responsive to our customers. Final thing is recognize specific things. Acknowledging employees or teams in real time that are contributing, showing your values, making contributions to the organization is very engaging. And the key thing is to do it now and do it for something specific. In the Jostle platform, we have shout-outs that allow that to happen, either from a leader to a team or from a peer to a peer or whatever. This is an example of another awesome customer, 511, who they're an online retailer in a very specialized market, and they have people all over the world. As you can see on the left side, they have a very rich set of shout-outs of people recognizing each other in real time for what's going on in their organization. Extremely motivating. So we'll now move to the last piece of the presentation and then on to Q&A, so do get your questions in. So this is a poll, And if you could let us know whether you have an intranet that's helping your employees engage. Is that part of what's happening in your organization? So please do vote, and the votes are coming in here. And once we get a reasonable number of people that have voted, we'll see what the results are. Just a couple more seconds and we'll close the polls. So thanks, really good input from everyone. So 44% are seeing some sort of input from their intranet. Interesting, 15% don't have an intranet at all. So these engagement platforms, if they're well executed, they really can help you bring your organization to life and engage your employees. So let's move back to the presentation. And it's time for Q&A. So please let us know what your questions are.
Hi, Brad. So thank you. That was really great. I would encourage everyone to take a very close look at that platform. It's pretty difficult to have high levels of engagement in an organization that doesn't have a cohesive way to connect people together and to share results. And in the improvement world, it's particularly important to have a way for people to learn what's being done, across the whole organization to make improvement. So I'm going to actually take this back for a second, if I could. I'm going to be the presenter because I want to go the first question. Hang on. Let's see, show my screen. I need to just change. There we go. All right, so I want to go back. Someone was asking about the slides. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the beginning and just there's another question about the link. So hang on. There we go. There's the link to the SlideShare place where the slides are. And yes, this is being recorded, and I believe that Jostle will have it on their site. I'll actually have it on my site as well as YouTube, Vimeo.com, and SlideShare. So I think you'll be getting a notice after the webinar from Jostle. Is that correct, Brad? That'll have the link? Okay.
Yeah, we'll get information out to all the participants very quickly and provide that link to them.
So, Brad, do you see the question about rolling out Jostle? What's the best way to engage employees? Okay, why don't you take that one?
I do. I will do that. Yeah, so we have a very intense coaching program to help customers do this and share best practices. And you can actually see that in that photo of the launch of Jostle. Almost all our customers are getting very enthused as they launch it. The key thing that that makes the engagement happen early on is that news view, and we help customers get news reporters set up in different silos, locations, departments in their organization, and start to bring out the little real-time stories of what's going on in the organization, people accomplishing something interesting that's going on, some employee exempling one of your values. When those are displayed alongside the more formal committee-reviewed, press release-y kind of employee communications, those two together provide a high level of engagement. And yes, we do work with customers to really clarify how they want to measure that engagement and to make sure it's measured before and after. Karen, there's some people wanting to know how to actually get your book. How do they do that?
Ah, yes. So it's The Outstanding Organization. That's a mouthful. And it's available on all major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I've actually seen it on several store shelves, physical bricks and mortar stores. Yeah, any major bookseller has it available.
Great.
There's another question about from Ron. How should lower-level managers introduce these engagement concepts to executives without insulting them? Maybe we could both answer that.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I prefer doing is having a bit of an executive overview to talk very specifically about engagement and have a dialogue about what their thoughts are about engagement so that I can sense where they're at as the current state, where their heads at, and how how aware are they? How enlightened are they in understanding what it takes to have highly engaged employees? And then I just go from there. So if it's a leadership team that is very command and control, I personally, from the outside, can play a little bit of tough love. If you're internal and a lower level manager, that's probably pretty darn risky. So I would recommend that you just take one or two of the items, and I recommend that you have it in a relaxed setting, possibly even out to lunch or something, and just gently bring up the topic, and then start sharing with leaders, upper level leaders, what your thoughts are and what you've been hearing, and give them a link to the webinar maybe, and those kinds of things will help break that ice, I believe. Brad, do you have any thoughts on how to?
Yeah, I do, and just a quick interlude before I comment on that. Jeremy, there seem to be some people, I think we've not had necessarily the right slides up in the last few minutes. Can you get the contact us slide up? That's probably the most useful one for people now.
Okay, sure. Sure.
And then back to the question here. So we actually get this question from a number of people that learn about Jostle and get enthused about what it could do for their organization. But, they are the internal communications person or, an intermediate level HR practitioner, and they have exactly this problem. What we will often do is, get that person to introduce us to, or, myself, or other senior people on my team that really understand the sort of leadership viewpoint here, get us connected with the next level of leadership, and we'll help them understand some of the things Karen was talking about and how software, how platform can really make their job as a leader a whole lot easier. There's also a question here which sort of relates to that, was how do I get a quick demo for Jostle? So please jump onto our website, which is jostle.me, jostle.me, and you'll quickly find a place there where you can request a demo, and we'd love to set up and understand what's going on in your organization and give you a personal demo that'll help you understand where we fit, and we can explore together whether it can make sense for your organization. What other questions do we have, Karen?
I don't know that we have any more questions coming in. Maybe if you are writing a question, oh, here's one. So question, how do you see an intranet working for field employees? And this happens to be someone from construction.
Yeah, well, that's actually going to be the topic of our next webinar. We're pulling together several of our customers to actually be the presenters. So it'll be good, practical, real-life explorations of people that have these challenges. We have a customer that is in the business of designing and building buildings. So they have this interesting challenge of there are a bunch of people back in the office who live in the office that do the planning and the architecture and the detailed project management kind of stuff. And then they've got about a third of their employees that are always out in the field, on the road, on the sites, making stuff happen and actually doing the hands-on management. So mobile is part of the answer there, and having a web-based, cloud-based platform that people can easily get to from any device is another really big part of the answer. We also have a bunch of customers that are cities, and cities are really interesting because every one of them has a third to half their employees that are in the field and that don't have access to any city systems. They don't have email addresses. And again, being able to get to a platform from anywhere, any device, without having to be on the rest of the work systems is very valuable.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I've had several clients that have pretty heavy field-based staffs, and certainly there's a high degree of disengagement with that lack of connection that field-based employees sometimes have. And so I do think it's a very important decision to make for an organization on how you are able to enable those field people to be able to connect up with the regular organization. It's very isolating in the field anyway. And so it's important to create technology means to keep people connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think there's a question about what size company you recommend, Brad, as far as using Jostle.
Yes, yeah, so we love mid-sized companies. Are the ones that are the most fun for us to work with. We call them up-and-comers. So, if you have a business that's growing from 100 people to 200 people to 400 people to 800 people, each time you double in size like that, every system you've got breaks, and you start to feel a bit disorganized. You start to feel like the culture and teamwork that got you where you are starting to be threatened. We actually have a turnkey solution to that that's really fun to see come into action and help customers focus and engage their workforce and continue their growth. So we love that mid-size, the up-and-comers.
That's great. Let's see, are there any more questions? I think we've answered all of them that came in. Maybe if anyone's going to be asking a question, if you're in the middle of typing, maybe raise your hand so that we know that you're in the process of submitting a question.
And we're almost out of time anyway, so why don't we wrap up? If there are further questions, we will respond to you in person, and you know how to reach us. We look forward to connecting further. If people want to use Karen's skills and wisdom to help move forward on this or explore further how a software platform can help, we'd love to interact with you. Thanks for your participation, and it was a great webinar. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.